So. So.
2017, jetzt der Hashtag.
So, das ist Tag 2. Ja, ich glaube, das ist nicht so ganz Day 1.
Schön mit Vornamen.
Okay, den Rest kennst du ja selber. Wir machen es einfach schon mal groß.
So the speaker of the second talk already here?
OhSGeo. Can I put them in the same table where I see your postcards? Can I put them in there? Okay.
No problem.
Thank you.
Darfst du nicht hier sitzen? Weil nämlich dann genau von der Kamera ganz sehen.
Aber da nicht.
Vielleicht man könnte sehr.
Dann ist wackeln, aber da ist es.
Alles okay.
Alles okay. Danke.
So I hope you all had a good lunch. You're full, satisfied, and curious about the next presentations. 3 presentations. I'm not sure. I think only the second presentation presenter I didn't see yet. But we're going to start with Stefan talking about challenges in geonames and address extraction. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Konnichiwa. Sound okay? Is this okay? I have to take it?
Maybe yeah.
Better?
You better take it.
Okay. So, my name is Stefan Keller. Nice to meet you. Nice to be here. And my rough agenda is about geonames and addresses. I first want to start about the motivation, why I want to talk about these 2 issues, and objects, domains, and then I first dive into geonames, geographical names, and then going to addresses, postal addresses, and then talking about some issues in capturing them and processing those OhSleepMap objects. So geoname search is, for example, when you ask where is Aizu Wakamatsu. And address geocoding is when you have such an address, like here, Tokyo Central Post Office, and then you have 5-3, Yaesu, 1, Kome, and some others, and want to go there. And that's called geocoding. So given a building address, you look for some coordinate in the second case, and in the first case, the geoname search case, you look for Aizu Wakamatsu, and you expect a coordinate or a bounding box. So both is kind of geocoding, and so my definition, my categorization is that the first geoname search is a rough geocoding, so given a geographical name, you want to look for the position, for the spatial position, and the second, the address geocoding, the building address geocoding. That's the fine-grained geocoding, coarse-grained, fine-grained, and both share some attributes, some properties, and issues. So, and then to focus once more on what I'm speaking about is I'm not speaking about geographical search engine software. You know, there is Lucene, there is Solar, there are some other kind of famous search engine software. Sphinx is some software. Google Search front end is such a software. I'm not talking about the search engine software at the bottom. And I'd like to explain shortly what this is all about. I'm a little bit talking about data pre-processing in the middle, data pre-processing software which took the OhSleepMap data you provided and processes it into some dedicated file which contains geonames and building addresses. In fact, if I talk of these two, there are two files as the target, as the outcome of the data pre-processing software process. The main target are just geonames and the bounding box or a coordinate, and then there is an ID. So, for example, a street or a castle, which has a castle, like the castle around, which has a coordinate. And that's one file, and then an ID, an OhSleepMap ID. And then there is a second file, database set, if you want, as the result at the very right of the middle data pre-processing software process. A second file, which has the buildings with their address, but without street name or location, just pointing with an awesome ID to the main file. So I'm talking about the main file as the output, and an additional file serves in a one-to-many relationship, many buildings relating to one address, I mean to one street usually, or block in Japan. And here I'm talking more specifically now about how to get to this data and how you will become perhaps a little bit more aware of how to enter and how to map the OhSleepMap data. So I'm talking about finally how you enter the data, because this needs to be pre-processed before it's going to be fed into the search engine software on the bottom. The example I'm showing are examples which have a front end, but this is just for the sake of an example. So I'm starting first to talk about geonames and in fact which contain some hierarchy. And also you only enter the Aizu Wakamatsu castle. You enter it with a coordinate. You implicitly enter, we implicitly can calculate a hierarchy in which county, in which city, in which state, in which country Aizu Wakamatsu castle, for example, is. So another example is Aizu Wakamatsu. When you look for it in OpenStreetMap, you will get this kind of result. Those who know, and that's somehow a relation, mainly consisting of a polygon, optionally because it's such an important administration. It's at admin level, it's indicating admin level 7. It's an important administration boundary. It also has a coordinate node of the city center of Aizu Wakamatsu. But mainly, if you look for Aizu Wakamatsu, you expect the bounding box, which lets you center on OpenStreetMap on this area. And that's the process of GeoName search, and that's the data you enter, and which now is being processed hierarchically in order to say it's in Japan. So let's keep in mind, it's not indicating that it is in Japan. It's just the data you entered, somebody entered, a Russian guy for a year ago, probably entered. It was just the boundary, and at least the type boundary administrative. It entered some attributes. It entered the English name, the Japanese name, and that's all he entered. So that's that data you enter, and that's what I'm talking about and what's behind this. The search engine behind OhSleepMap, it's Nominatim, which you can query separately. And there you see, once again, on the left upper side, the pure data entered by a mapper. And then you see at the lower end of the slide the address. So IQ Wakamatsu is a relation boundary, it's a boundary, and it has this English name. And then you see its hierarchy, which is going up to Japan. And there is another project which I invented some time ago, which is now somehow maturing. The website is called OhSleepMapNames.org. That's only a front end, only somehow the gallery of showing the data, because this project is mainly all about the data processing, the processed data extracted from OhSleepMap, which is ready for GeoName search and ready for address and geocoding. So if you enter Aizu Wakamatsu, it gives you again the bounding box and the processed data, which you don't see actually. It's a little bit smaller font to the down right. And this is the output of the data process, where we take OhSleepMap data with a clear license, and we extract geonames as the main file and addresses as the secondary file. Now, this is not the address file, this is just the geoname file which you see, and these days we released the address file as a secondary file as a new release. This is the one you see when you look at OSMnames.org and when you search for Aizu Wakamatsu. I slightly modified it, so you see the local name, which I can't spell, you know, the name in Japanese characters, which is the main name. Then there are alternative names collected by other languages, and in fact only two. I'll come back to this. It seems to be Roman English and Russian. I'm not sure, but I think it's could be Russian, an alternative name. Just collected, extracted out of OhSleepMap data and other data. It's not a street, it's just an empty entry. It's a county, Fukushima. I mean, that's a standardized name in our scheme. In fact, it's not called a county in Japanese, in Japan, I know, but we have some standard database scheme which mentions street, county, city, state, country, and then Japan, then it stops. There are even country codes and other metadata around this. Then you see the bounding box in World Geographic Coordinates, and the OhSleepMap ID it should be the same, 41, starting with 41. You see that must be the name of the relation, starting with 41. You see on top of the URL of the web address. And it's of type administrative boundary, and there is some ranking. And that's another kind of magic behind geographic name search. So once again, the hierarchy is very important. And that's all derived from OhSleepMap. So starting with the country, which is the highest level you usually we derive, which is Japan, the national level. Eventually, it's only the mainland you mean by country, but it's the country level. Then you have second, the state level, city level, then county, town level, and the fifth hierarchy is village, suburb, and neighborhood level. So sub town level. These are all administrative divisions, and they are all polygons. And if they are not, we have a first issue. But since they are polygons, you can calculate hierarchy and attach it to Aizu Wakamatsu. That's what took place when Nomina team calculated all the address information on the bottom of the slide out of the data. So another important thing to mention besides hierarchical information attached to one simple coordinate or bounding box or polygon, one important thing is what's a name anyway. So what's this kind of unspeakable Japanese, which is the local name? You expect of course, the English name and even the Russian name and others. So this one, do I have a pointer or something? Some cursor? One second. I'm somehow there. Cursor. So the local name, that's this one, the first one. That's an endonym because locals call it. Oh, thank you very much. So that's the local one, and that's called the endonym because locals call it officially like this. And in Japanese, it's repeated, but indicated that this is Japanese, and that's in the Roman characters, the official name. And then there is also something like that's now for the castle. I'm sorry. I just realized now, reading the English, that's not for the city, that's for the castle. The English name of the castle is Aizu Wakamatsu Castle, which is the endonym, so how Englishmen call the Aizu Wakamatsu Castle. Then there is even an alternative name to the Aizu Wakamatsu Castle, which is Tsuruga. How they want to call it alternatively in English, and of course in Japanese letters, the very bottom. So there are many alternate names where people expect to find this castle when they type in Tsuruga Castle. They expect that it will be found. So another problem is that we don't expect in OhSleepMap 196 alternative names. That's not the goal of OhSleepMap. So that's the reason why Nomina team and also OhSleepMap names and also Mapbox, for example, they take Wikidata and try to match the name and add other names from other countries of the same other exonyms of the same place, in order that you can query Aizu Wakamatsu even in Russian or in South Korean. Issues in tagging geonames are that people think name is like a remark section, a remark attribute, or some descriptive thing. It is not. You even should avoid the name castle because when giving this as an example, in fact, it's already of type castle, so you should not add the name castle with some exceptions. Only if it's really officially named something like hotel. So also for hotels, you should not add the name hotel. It's just the name of the hotel, Washington, and then you say it's a hotel. So a name is just a name only. That's how the wiki of OhSleepMap also advises. Another issue is how to rank geonames. If you zoom out, you expect the more important cities to remain on the map, and not very small places. And ranking is very hard issue to calculate the ranking of some place. So you help by adding some things like the correct administrative level, and you help also by adding the Wikidata entry to Aizu Wakamatsu in order to look up at Wikidata how large the population is, and because of this additional information, data processing software can derive the ranking, the importance of Aizu Wakamatsu, when you know how many people are living nearby, living in this city. Third, the admin level, there is no international consensus, but neither in OhSleepMap. And the very hard part is for urban areas to get the right administrative level, which goes from 1 to 10. 1 is never used, that's supernatural level. So it's country level 2 down to neighborhood level 10. And between 7, 8, 9, and 10, there is no agreement in OhSleepMap, and that should become better in the near future in order to derive the right administrative level. Because it can happen that Aizu Wakamatsu is attached straight to Japan or to Fukushima. Even there is sometimes perhaps another level in between. Lastly, often these sub city levels they exist, but only as a node, as a point feature, but people know it's known as an aerial place. So objects of larger aerial extent, which are captured only as a node, because perhaps the boundary is not known, they still should have some information how large the extent is. Is it 100 meters for the Tour of Eiffel? It's also a place, so it's about perhaps 1 kilometer, or is it 10 kilometers or something, in order to get the correct bounding box, in order to zoom in at the right place if you enter Tour of Eiffel, the Eiffel, the famous Eiffel Dome of Paris. Now, turning to addresses, postal addresses. Not only for writing a letter, so my emphasis is not about zip code or postal codes, it's a building number, which is the most important thing internationally. So it's about building addresses. Given a list of street geonames, so in the process I explained before, I took street as part of a geoname. In fact, often streets take over the name of places and vice versa. So in this technical process, streets are considered geographic names. They get their proper hierarchy and everything else pre-processed given at this stage. Now, given the street names with their hierarchy and their ranking and things like this, the goal of the second part of the process in order to get the correct addresses is get all objects which have an other house number on it. And there in OhSleepMap, the so-called Karlsruhe schema has been adopted, and it's all starting with ADDR as the main key, as the key name. So what we can assume, we now focus only on all objects having other house number. The goal is now to generate this somehow secondary file, I call file, which is the building address file. This building address file has not a coordinate on it, it has the OSM ID, which links this building, a specific building like this culture center. It links this to some address by saying which OSM ID is related to the other geoname, which then has all the hierarchy attached to it and pre-processed. The Karlsruhe schema says an address can, another key, either house number key, can be added to a node, which is the most common way, I think. It can be an isolated node, or it can be an attribute when you add a shop. It can be it can be a node on top of a building boundary with the tag entrance equals yes to indicate where the entrance is, which is actually very important. How to find the entrance of this building wasn't that easy if I'm entering from the other side. And the emergency facilities and organizations are very keen to know where the entrance is. In fact, that's a rather complicated thing to process, by the way. The third one is a node. It's a node on a polygon, inside the polygon, physically, I mean spatially inside the polygon, where the polygon has building key. And that's also very common. The second common, besides the isolated node. The fourth one is a node on a polygon representing the perimeter of a site. The second last one is it's on a relation, that's not so common. And finally, it's also possible to have one virtual invisible way with the tag interpolation, where you say starting by house number 2 up to house number 20, you can interpolate 2 for house number 6, 8, 10, and so forth. That's also sometimes in some cities very common. Most common are number 1 and 3, I think, out of my heart. So which options are there to relate a house number to a street from a data processing point of view? So what you've done so far, hopefully correctly, is choose one of those to add a house number. That's what you do. And now the data processing comes in, which is something of my interest to explain to you the problems and how this works. Because the minimal thing you have to enter is just the house number. I mean, that's the very minimal thing. And probably the street name, other street or other place. So the majority is you enter other house number in any options like there, and other street as a name. And that's all you enter. Now, the computer processing process comes in, and it takes several approaches, and that's almost, I'm explaining now somehow the basic principle of how Nominatim works, and also OSMNames.org, which is somehow like a derivative of this nice project Nominatim. So first, the house numbers are the easiest one from a computational point of view is when there is a relation. I switch back. So for this option, the relationship option, where is it? Second last one, that's the easiest one to process because it's somehow a direct relationship. The relation points directly to the house number and to the street name, so we have a direct match without any search. It's the easiest one to process. The second easiest one is does the attribute street or alternatively place exist in the surrounding, and if they match directly, I mean is the string match or 100% match, then that's about 80% which match. And now, after having done, the remainder is the more hard stuff. Sometimes, if people add street as a name into the string, but in fact it's only the street, that's already a problem, because blah blah street and blah blah does not match because of the street. So for a dump match, a string match algorithm, that's already a problem. Somehow, how to find out that there is a partial match. And so, if there are only few things to replace, if there is a close match, we can catch another 15%. So we are about up to 89%, 85% of all existing house numbers, where we can attach a street name, which means we can get the full address to say in which city this street exists and so on. And the fourth step is apply street proximity search, a spatial search, if there is no attribute street nor place, which is an expensive computation, but well known. I mean, thanks to databases like PostGIS, we can do this, but it takes quite some time. So in fact, the whole process, you have to expect that this takes about 2 days for the whole world to process. On a strong computer, I mean on a computer with about 32 gigabyte memory, not just a small laptop I have with me. So that's all for the process. And what I didn't cover, but still are usually processed, there are ways with interpolation, there are nodes with associated streets, there are also clever things you can do if point of interests have no address, but are sitting inside the building boundary. And so you can derive and assume that the shop also gets the address of the building, of course, because it's spatially inside the building. That's a cheap process, but still needs some computation. What I also didn't tell you, if there are zip codes added, we carry these along and we keep them, of course. Now the issues are about the following regarding to tagging addresses. If you have adder street not spelled in the correct way, we have a problem, and this is very annoying because the mapper could check the name of the street and align it, and that's very important. So take care how you add the street name. Then I leave the second one out. The third one are nodes with entrance. Yes, sitting on top of a building is in fact a double indirection, which is computationally very expensive. So if this is the node, and if my presentation table now is the building, and this is entrance equals yes, that's a separate object. So we have an address, a house number, and we have a street attached on it, but it's a node. Now it's supposed to sit on the way, on the boundary. So we first have to make a spatial somehow join, to join this node to the way. And then that's the first indirection, the first resolution, the first match. We have to relate this node to the building. And then we have the building which now knows the address. And then we have everything inside, which is the second indirection where we can attach the correct address. So when you have, that's often in large buildings, and it's nice to do because then you know the entrance, but it's computationally very extensive, but that's not your fault. So that's not an issue. It's only for mappers. It's only an issue probably for the computer. In fact, Nomina team even really does not resolve this issue as far as I know. Also, I recommend to have entrance yes to indicate the entrance, but Nomina team then will not attach addresses to shops inside these buildings. Finally, nodes. In Europe, we often have some set of buildings which have only one postal entry, so we somehow say it's house number 1 and 3 and 5, at this street that's convenient for a mapper, but very inconvenient to process. And I would like to say that you restrain from entering these if you can, and enter 3 house number nodes instead of this. So the messages to go, and that's almost my last slide for today. So addresses are an important asset, an important data set of OhSleepMap and of geographical information science in general. Just to remind, those are the ones you usually expect to buy and to pay quite some money from commercial companies when you want to have addresses. In fact, another indication is that free geocoders change almost every month, except Nominati, which remained available since years. But I tried to keep the pace and to have a list of free geocoders. And in fact, they change, I mean the free ones at least, change every other month their paying plan, their price plan, and even Microsoft and Google changed their commercial plan, how to access those addresses. So it's really one of the few of the categories of spatial data which are very important. Geonames, I mean not the house numbers, are also very important because there you can locate tweets when somebody says, I'm in the city hall or the cultural center in Aizu, and you leave out Wakamatsu. You still expect somehow this could be in Japan, and that's the power of geonames. My wish list, as I indicated through my issues, are that mappers are assigning more consistently administrative levels 7 to 9, 6, 7 to 9, then they are, and then that they are more consistent of assigning names, street names, or house names. And I want to launch a discussion of how to map geonames of larger areal extent with fuzzy boundaries. And so in order to attach them the correct rank and the correct bounding box, which is important for geocoding geonames. So now the stage is open for discussion. If there is some time left. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much too. Actually no time for discussion, but there are another 2 days where Stefan is around all the time. And I'm looking for the second presenter. I don't... Okay. Your slides are here?
I hope so. I saw
Yeah, so very quick switch. Our next talk is about one road goes a long way, and it's about Tanzania, and I can't pronounce your name correctly, so you probably introduce yourself.
Okay.
And I let you continue.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, Egle Marija Ramanauskaite. Sorry about such a weird name. I'm from Lithuania, but my project is in Tanzania. I represent the Human Computation Institute, which is actually in the US, so a bit of a geographical confusion. And I'm co-founder of Crowd2Map Tanzania project, which you might know from other State of the Map conferences and other conferences. and I'm going to tell you a little bit about our project and how we set out to measure how the maps are actually helping in rural Tanzania. So the funny thing is about Crowd2Map, it happened by accident. We didn't really mean to map. We knew nothing about maps or OpenStreetMap. Me and my colleague met in a conference and started looking for opportunities for citizen science in Tanzanian schools. That led to using smartphones to collect data. And we wanted to collect something meaningful, so just to try, we started collecting the locations of water points, assuming that sometimes the government data is not very representative. And suddenly we realized that we had the coordinates of water points and we could add them to the map, and actually the map is really empty, so we could collect more points and add them to the map. So that was kind of a not random, but interesting turn of events. And that led to identifying some other problems we could solve with maps in Tanzania. So one of them is female genital mutilation, which is still very commonly practiced in some regions of Tanzania, especially Nara. So we've been working with Mugumu Safe House, which was established in 2014, saving girls from this practice. And we were thinking, well, the region is blank on the map. It must be difficult to do outreach in villages when you don't know where they are. And we also had this fuzzy realization that maps could also help other development issues. So that's how we started. And since 2015, we've actually done quite a bit. So you can see the numbers. We have over 2,000 volunteers now. We've put 1.5 million buildings on the map, which is a few million people, and so on. Schools, hospitals, we've identified villages, we named them, but so what? So what that we did all this? It's kind of, it's become usual to us to assume that maps are useful, but I'm a researcher by training, and for me it's not obvious. It seems obvious, but we need to really check why are they useful. So that's why I set out to do the study. Of course, the two obvious ways is to do quantitative analysis, except that you can't really do quantitative analysis when you have no data. And as you might know, in Tanzania, it's a bit difficult to collect reliable quantitative data on FGM cases and other things. And we've just created the map, so it's kind of difficult to measure what impact they could be making. And of course, there's qualitative data, which is much more interesting, talking to people. But that was not so easy either, so I will tell about this in a minute. So the main focus of the study was interviews, and in a kind of a cry of desperation, I also issued an online survey to reach more people. It didn't really work. Yeah, but we interviewed community members and community leaders. So by community leaders, I mean people involved in training community members to map, heavily involved in our mapping program, people from the Mugumu Safe House, and so on. And we did a group interview. And what we found out is that most people in rural communities can kind of be separated into three categories. So some of them have access to maps. They either use paper or phone maps, but actually that's the minority. Most people don't have access to maps, even if they're in one way or another linked to our mapping program. And some people say that they've never seen a map. And that's interesting, because then you point out that, well, you might have seen an atlas in school, or maybe a paper map in your village office, and then they realize, yeah, well, oh yeah, I did see that. But for them, it's not very meaningful, so they didn't even think about a map as something that they could use. But surprisingly, most of them say that, but yeah, maps are useful, even though we don't use them. And they have minor to good knowledge about the kind of uses of maps. It's mostly navigation, but some of them can list more uses, and I will talk about this in a minute. so that's the first point I've already mentioned. If you point out that they might have seen an atlas, they remember, but that's not very useful. So in Tanzania, in rural Tanzania, a lot of people drop out of school after primary school. So an atlas or of the region is the most they would have seen of a map, but it's not your local map, so it's not really, doesn't really make you aware that you could use your local map as well. One interesting case was the driver in the safe house. We've been mapping with the safe house for 2 years, but the driver in the safe house has never seen a map. So that kind of raises a question: how is this information shared? Why are they not becoming aware sometimes? But yeah, it's interesting that most people can point out that at least maps could be used for navigation, and everybody is very enthusiastic when you tell them that here's the map, here it is hanging in your village office, and we could even teach you to use a phone map, and they get very enthusiastic very quickly, and they want to learn and use them. But at the moment, the majority of the community does not use maps. Right, and so to go more in depth of our interviews, sorry for a lot of text, but I kind of wanted the community to speak here, not me. So I gathered a lot of interesting views from them, and some of the interesting things are that some locals say they use maps, but it's not the maps that we're thinking about. One of the safe house, the girls in the safe house, said she used a map in her hometown, but after talking to her through a translator for a while, we realized that she used her knowledge. She used a map in her head. She was born and raised there, so she knew all the roads or all the shortcuts, and that's what helped her, not maps. Another case was a 55 years old community member who was given a piece of paper and drew a completely accurate map of his local ward, and then they went with a volunteer to see all those places, and it was all exactly as he drew it. But then, what if you're out of your hometown or your home ward? And that's where the problems begin. So the same girl, she moved from her hometown to the safe house, and obviously she could no longer navigate. So her main way of navigation now, and that's true for many people there, is other people. So you find a volunteer like Joanna. We may call her, come, we want to see some area, and Joanna directs you. You're supposed to go there, turn right, go there. And even more importantly, that's the same with the safe house. So girls flee to the Mugume safe house all throughout the Nara region, but none of them know where safe house is. And they don't have maps, no. So the director of the safe house told me that there hasn't been a single case when a girl used a map to find the safe house. They just ask people. And thankfully there are activists in most villages who direct them, which also goes like this. You need to go to the road that leads to the hospital, then turn right, then go there, which of course is not always so easy. But the thing I found out, which we kind of weren't that aware of, is that everyone is very excited about paper maps, and they would use it if only they could. It's very useful for rural areas specifically, because right now most people we work with don't have smartphones. There's maybe a couple of smartphones in the village, so they cannot use online maps. And even if they do have smartphones, they have internet issues and so on. So the paper maps, such a simple thing, but it would be a major change. And the same thing with the girls fleeing to the safe house. The director said that it would be much easier for them if they had the paper map, because then they would know where to go. Because sometimes they meet people who are actually not going to help them, but they're keepers of the traditional practices, and they mislead them on purpose and tell them to go back, not to get lost, and that's how they end up back in their villages and getting cut. I asked the director would they be able to use the maps, but there's activists and there's other girls who would be able to show them, which would make a major difference. But in the Safe House, maps are not just basic navigation, so I was very glad to find out that actually our efforts are paying off, and the Safe House leaders are using maps for a variety of things. So first of all, they need to know where activists, the trusted people, live in every village, so they can communicate with them and also direct girls to them. Also very interesting is that they assign safe places for the girls to gather, and they communicate those with the activists in the villages. But sometimes those places are discovered by parents or other people trying to prevent girls from fleeing. But there has been cases where, because they have maps now, they could communicate with the activists about a new place. The activists direct the girls to the new place. They tell the Safe House exactly where to go, and they go there very quickly and find them. And the girls go, "Oh, how did you find us?" Yeah, and of course they now can pick optimal routes and plan their fuel costs, which is of course important when you have limited resources, especially during the cutting season. There's hundreds of girls who come to the Safe House, and they can find the best roads to get to the girls faster. And this is the main quote that the director of the Mugumu Safe House gave me. I knew maps were important, but I didn't know that they was so difficult for them in the beginning. So it was very difficult in the beginning to save girls. They didn't know where the villages are. They didn't know which roads to use. And most importantly, the people who established the Safe House were new to the area. So sometimes they would be late to collect the girls. They would get stuck in bad roads, and the girls would end up being taken back to the villages and getting cut. So, so there you go. But now we want to look more deeply into how we can measure the impact of maps on reducing FGM. But now it's very complicated because the maps are new, and FGM data is very patchy. But we have used density maps to identify, first of all, which region we still need to map, and where could the villages be where the girls are hiding, so, or where are they coming from. So we knew vaguely the kind of area, the direction from Mugumu where the villages were. We knew the names, but they weren't on the map, so we used the building density to discover them. But it's difficult to dwell into deeper analysis. First of all, we have the FGM data at the Safe House, but it's not representative of the region. It's just the cases that reach the Safe House. We have DHS data, which is also not very reliable. It's self-reported. It's not representative of the region. It's cases of different years. It's before mapping, so we tried to do some studies, but didn't really get anywhere. Right, and there's so many things involved in preventing FGM other than maps, obviously. But I do have hope that we can do more systematic data collection and look into it in a bit more depth in the future. And we have different kind of groups helping us to work on this. But it's not just fighting FGM, of course. It's generally rural development. And this is all that the community members have told me. What do they use maps for, or would they use maps for? So what's important to them is being able to define ward boundaries, which is the little administrational units in Tanzania, resolving disputes sometimes between different wards. There's been cases when a ward was divided, and then you need the map to figure out its new boundaries. Identifying resources is very important. For example, land use. So if you know where a forest or a farming land is that you could use, you obviously could take advantage of it. And one of the main things everybody mentions is knowing where essential services are. So educational health facilities, and for government leaders, that also means better planning, where to put your resources. And in general, a lot of community members say that having maps empowers communities themselves to tackle their own problems, to bring their problems to the government, and so on. Right. But maps is just the beginning. So this was kind of the biggest eye-opener for me. We were very excited that we are getting so much mapping done, so many volunteers, so many points added to the map, such a big area that we've already covered with the hot tasking manager. But it's not so easy. The maps are incomplete. We only have remote mapping of buildings and roads and maps.me points. And if it's not complete, it's not fully usable. You can't fully navigate and so on. People that we work with don't actually have access to those maps for phones. Printed maps are not distributed yet, so we are a grassroots project with a minimal budget, and we have not done this yet, which I think we should do next. And the villagers themselves are also saying it's too expensive, we cannot print them. But they all would love to have maps more than just in ward offices, which some places started to do, and we also brought some maps to the offices. But they should be available in all kinds of public facilities, so it's very easy to access a map if you need one. And most importantly, communities need to be educated and made aware of the use of maps, because it's not just enough to have a map of your area if nobody knows to use it. And that was very interesting also for me when I was asking everybody what would be the next big improvement in the map for you. And some people said add more resources, add more facilities to the maps. But some said immediately nothing like that, but continue to do mapping, but also involve different people in the community. Involve continued education of village communities about the importance of mapping. So the next big improvement in the map is not the map itself, but ability of people to use the map. Right, but we're making progress. What's really amazing is that now every girl who graduates the Safe House, where they also get vocational education, they also train to map. So people there are heavily involved. They participating in our mapping parties, and all the girls, most of the girls who are old enough, they learn to map. And the girls are also very enthusiastic to continue mapping. And when they go back to their communities, they would like to teach their communities. But now they don't have phones or paper maps, so that's a limitation. We just recently started a community mapping program enabled by Hot Microgrant, where community mappers go and they get a number of phones. They go and map their area and teach other community members, and then the phones go to the next village, and we repeat. So we're on the right track, but we need to remember what's more important, to create a map or to make it usable. And just kind of the last heavy slide, I wanted to talk about all the different kind of limitations of doing an impact study in Tanzania, but the list is very long. So just a few things. I've already mentioned about the quantitative data, but even regarding the qualitative data, first of all, the researcher was not in Tanzania, that's me. I've never been to Tanzania, but my colleague Janet, she collected the interviews. But it was inconsistent, the methodology was not really followed due to circumstances. It's just complicated to work there like that. And another interesting thing was, obviously some of the interviewees, they needed a translator, which is fine, but then when I realized how many steps there were, the translator gives the question to the interviewee, then the translator gives the answer to us, then I transcribe it at home in Lithuania. There's just too many steps, and I could see that I'm losing bits of information. So we kind of didn't make the best use of those interviews that way. The survey was useless because, first of all, not a lot of people can access it, locals in Tanzania, and surveys are just kind of useless in this case. We need to do an exploratory study. I kind of call myself an ethnographist. I like to live in the place and observe and listen to people, dive into the narratives, and so survey is just not the way to do it. Interviews is, of course, a lot better. if we can achieve that. So yeah, but it's still, it's even with the interviews, it was difficult to pick out what was real and what wasn't, because the community members and especially the officials, I could tell that they tell me what I want to hear, because obviously they want us to put more resources into mapping. They want us to help them and so on, and they didn't want to admit that not a lot of people use maps in their area, which is all understandable, but we kind of need to know the situation to help them. Yeah, but with long interviews, I did get to the bottom of some of those, and some of them do admit this, and they also propose their own solutions, which was really useful. So there you go. It takes a village. A lot of people contributed to the study. Our Crowd to Map Tanzania team, Janet and Gabor, my mentor at the Human Computation Institute, Pietro Michelucci. We have 2,000 volunteers now who are all helping in their own ways and making a difference. I also like to mention Azeveda's Summer of Maps program, which helped us to do some of the GIS studies, and of course the hot microgrants. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions?
How are you printing the maps?
We're not. What do you mean?
To get printed maps, you're not doing. They're not printing them, or
They're not. We have printed some of the maps that we did of some of the bits of the Nara region and brought them to the safe house and a couple villages. But yeah, nobody prints maps.
Someone else? Somebody?
Yeah.
Also the fact that FGN is culturally motivated and traditionally motivated in Africa. Like it's connected to secret societies that have stakeholders. And what were the challenges faced from those stakeholders in implementing this FGN project in other words to safeguard and
Yeah, so that's a bit of a question for my colleague who works directly in the safe house. Well, yeah, I cannot answer this in great detail, but I know the safe house leaders, they constantly face people who prevent them from going to the villages, just like physically prevent them from going to the villages and doing outreach there. Yeah, but they've kind of come up with a strong program to battle this, and they're dedicated to the cause and to the girls. They don't let them go back unless the parents sign the affidavit, and yeah, but yeah, it's a complicated thing.
Okay, and I think also here in this case, the speakers of the first day are lucky because they have another 2 days to talk with you. And, yeah, I think we continue then this next talk. And yeah, thank you very much for that. Turn off the middle lights. the weather is not good like here, it's better to turn off the light. Our next speaker is from Japan. His name is Yuichiro Nishimura, and he will present about Totsukawa after the heavy rainfall disaster. And I'm not sure how many people are still looking for a place, but there is enough. You don't have to hide in the background.
Hi. Good afternoon. I'd like to talk about Totsukawa. Totsukawa is the place name in the Nara, so I'd like to show it to you after that my OSMFJ. And this is Aizuwakamatsu, and it is far from Aizuwakamatsu. Geo is Kansai area. So I'm came from Nara, and today I'd like to talk about Totsukawa in Nara prefecture, and also I have to do some work about the video streaming stuff of this venue, so that if some trouble occurred, I will go immediately. So, do you know Nara? No? Very big Buddhist statue and Todaiji temple, and I'm working at the Nara Women's University. It is that's established more than 110 years ago, and this is my OSMCB. And my career starts from October 2010, and my main focus area is about Kansai area. You can see, and the Tohoku, and I'm doing mapping at another developing country like Laos or something like that, missing maps area. And I'm also a human geographer, and one of my main interests is GIS and society. And my mapping activities on OhSleepMap is about mapping newly built neighborhood and campus mapping. And I will do I have some classes about geography, and I did the education, geographical education, and I use OhSleepMap. So this is a newly developed area near my house, and I have to do mapping speedy than Google Map or another mapping industry. So this is my first. This is I like it, and in Japan there are many bias of mappers, gender bias or age bias or ability bias. So most of Japanese mappers are male, middle-aged IT lovers. So so there is few proportion of female mappers, few proportion of elderly or student mappers, or few proportion of disability mappers. So, and I think OpenStreetMap can help diverse needs and maps for each users. So, and I'm doing OpenStreetMap for geographical education. OpenStreetMap mapping is quite meaningful for geographical education. This is how to make map, how to use GPS, or how to see the place and geographic features by fieldwork. And the student also learn the possibility and the limitation of geographical mapping. So shortly, I'd like to introduce our campus mapping. 2010, just 7 students start the campus mapping, and this is 2010, and this is 2013, 14, 15. So that's like campus mapping is still going. And this time I'd like to talk about heavy rainfall disaster occurred in mountainous area of Nara, September 2011. And 2011, you know, the very huge earthquake in Tohoku area, but also in September, there are very huge rainfall disaster occurred in Key Peninsula. So, and the landslide occurred on September 3rd in Totsukawa. So you know, if you know Nara, but most of you didn't go to Totsukawa village. Totsukawa village is it takes more than 4 hours between Totsukawa village and Nara city by public transport. The distance is over 100 kilometers. Largest village in Japan in terms of land area. So that total area is more than 600 kilometers, and several serious damages by heavy rainfall disaster was occurred. So, and you know that some of you are knowing in Hokkaido there is a Shin Totsukawa village. Shin Totsukawa is was built by migration villagers at the Meiji era's disasters. So heavy rain, and this is also a heavy rainfall disaster. And such like that, heavy rainfall triggered huge landslides in the village. 6 people died, and 6 people are still missing in the village. And main roads are also damaged by the landslide, and outsider cannot enter the village over the several months. So this is now one of the disaster area, and we take some. This is taken by drones last winter, and this is a landslide area. So, and a very huge amount of sand and mud threw down. So that is map of landslide area, and huge landslide occurred, and the sand and mud overflowed the river, and the center two of house disrupted. So, and we Japanese OpenStreetMap community did crisis mapping from Yahoo Japan Alps data and Bing satellite image and GSI base map for drawing buildings and roads, such like that. So, and we made the disaster portal using CloudMap. So because we did the crisis mapping because of in Japan also have a missing mapped area. So web maps of mountainous area in Japan has low quality by Google Maps. Google Japan uses zoomed map data from Zenlin residential maps, mainly focused on the urbanized area. Remote area over zoom level 70 have no detailed scale web map. So such like the this is Totsukawa, and this is Nara city. So this is an example of Totsukawa OhSleepMap data. Right side is from Google Maps, and left side is from OhSleepMap, and they have much of features in the map. So in that area, we have bus station and hot spring stand. On the right side, you can buy hot spring water, buy some coins, and independent or convenience store closed 7 p.m. So and such like that data, and there is such like small roads, and recently digital globe images introduced, and it will be a great help for making maps of remote areas in Japan. So this time I presented the Totsukawa situation at the State of the Map in Tokyo 2012, and after the heavy rainfall disaster, 6 years have passed, and reconstruction of infrastructure, especially road infrastructure, progressed, and regional population is shrinking continuously, and depopulated areas are expanding. There is some possibility of mapping, and also have limits of mapping. So, and this is a newly constructed road, very good road, and this mapped to OpenStreetMap, also Mapillary, and such like that, very good road, and this will be such like tunnels pass through the disaster area, and this is a population of Totsukawa, and every 5 years, just like minus 10% decline of population is progress. So especially these red line means elderly population, and green line is younger population, and yellow line means middle-aged population. And in Totsukawa, until 1990s, elderly people is growing in numbers, but younger and middle-aged population is small in numbers. But now situation is changed, and all of generation, the population is declining. So, and this time I'd like to talk about some new trying of village authority. One is the village authority is making a book of history and geography of Totsukawa. So, and they want to show the villagers the civilization or modernization history of Totsukawa. And this is one example. And the left is old village office, and right is village office, now village office. And because they moved village office 1950s, so, and because if they why the village office is moved is because all the road and settlements located at not a small flat land near the river, but mountain ridge. But mountain ridge is not convenient place for moving using automobiles or public transport. So they moved the village office. So, and this is one of the ancient roads. So, and it is located at a mountain ridge. So, and this is some of such like path, footpaths will be ancient religious roads, and this will be this is now World Heritage, and many foreigners, foreign people coming to Totsukawa for walking Kumano-Kodo, and this is there is some needs for making such like mapping. This is also a living space for villagers, such like that. So this is he sees living at such like settlements, and live alone, and she plays with wild animals or wild plants also, and such like wild poetry. So, and now I'm now doing for making a book of history and geography of Totsukawa. I now making photos now and then. This is the photos of small settlements. They have over 250 small settlements in Totsukawa, and in in such like settlement in 1950 to 1970 are found at Totsukawa Museum. So such like photos. So and now I'm taking such like picture. On the top left side is a 1970s picture, and now pictures. This is a picture of power plant built at the 1960s. So this is one settlement. So just landscape of the villages not so changed, but the village bridge is changed to new one, and we cannot take same precisely same picture. So because bridge location is changed. So such like Nakatani-bashi in OpenStreetMap. So and I take the picture, such like picture by drone because over 40 years have passed, and it is very severe situation for taking photos from same point and angle. Such like figures, the sometimes trees are grown, and we don't take same point to take a picture. So such like that, we use drone to take photos now and then with cooperation with Osaka State University's staff. So and finally, I'd like to speak about the village is now changing. So one example, I'd like to introduce kiridas. Kiridas means Japanese word cutting trees, kiridas. And they have atelier and craftsman making wood furniture, and also kiridas have coffee and lighting mill and selling wooden goods. So there is also already have at the OhSleepMap. And school is also changing. This is six years ago. I take 2012. I took the picture on the top side, and there were settled. There are some houses for refugees, and on the bottom right side is now situation. These houses are already you cannot see, and a new school building is constructed. So something like some cases they don't use only 5 years passed, but the bridge is now closed. So and such cases. So and we are now I'm a member of Book of History and Geography of Totsukawa. So and some editing member. So and we are making a book, not only book but also we collect the data, and it will be open data which will be use open data platform, and we made OhSleepMap at the investigation, or we produce some data. So we upload to Wikipedia town or some local wiki or something like that. So and code for Nara will this is located at Nara city, but in future they will help some Totsukawa making data open data of Totsukawa. So and finally I have further issues, and supporting OhSleepMap community building in the village, and publicity of OhSleepMap is needed. In Japan, Google Maps have dominant position, and but the very possibility of OhSleepMap is in such like a mountainous area, local area. So the field survey by local resident is needed for keeping the data quality. So thank you very much.
Are there some questions? If you need time to think. My question is, so does the local government now at least know OhSleepMap in Totsukawa?
So and many of government staff is Totsukawa villagers, originally Totsukawa villagers. So the most of them don't need the map itself, but they want they need a map for outsider. So and some facilities is coming to outsiders or foreign people, or another Japanese people coming to from populated area. So and they don't have knowledge about Totsukawa. So for such like people, the map is needed. Right.
Okay. Yeah, I knew that the map data of Google is bad in countryside, but I didn't know it's like all around the country. So
Yes.
it's actually a chance.
Yes, I think so.
Some other question? Otherwise, I would say thank you, and see you again after the lunch break. Coffee break.